Who's the most skillful basketball player ever?
That's hard.
Drew Hanlen, welcome back to the show, man.
What's going on, my man? How are you?
I am well. I heard that you actually brainwash your players.
It's funny when my guys always bring that up in interviews, but I think it's actually a good thing. You know what I mean? The fact that a lot of times when people ask my players, like, what does Drew help you most with? A lot of people would think that they would go right to the skill, but the majority of them go to the mental side of the game, which I think is just as important. I really do, because I always tell people, like, the best of the best are the best for a reason. You know what I mean? Like, all these guys are really, really good because they are really, really good at basketball. And so our job as skills coaches or trainers or coaches is to try to get them to a level that they can't get themselves. And so I think that there's a lot of yes men, there's a lot of rebounders, there's a lot of highlighters, people that, want to just post the work that the player's putting in. But for me, it's trying to pull strings and trying to get under their skin and trying to do anything and everything I can to get something out of them that they can't get themselves.
I want you to take me down this rabbit hole, but everybody is an NBA skills trader on Instagram, and they always have the most hateful comments towards me, Drew. They're always going at me, and everybody's one of them. There's more NBA skills trainers than NBA players, Drew. How's it possible?
Yeah, no, I know. It's one of those things where I said I wish there was a rule that basically tracked how long you had to date somebody before you posted them, and however long that was, that's how long you had to train somebody before you were allowed to post them. And same thing, I always say, like, you wouldn't post a girl if she didn't claim you back. If a player doesn't say that, like, you're their trainer, you shouldn't be allowed to post them. But that's another topic.
Most definitely. What have you made of the point forward Cooper experiment? I know Jason Kidd also did this with your guy Giannis back in the day. I actually love it, but he is playing better since they took him out of that point forward role. What do you make of all of it?
I think it's good and bad. I think the good side of it is, I think as a young player, the more you can experiment, the more you can learn, the more you can try, then one, you get film of what you're not good at so that you can address those issues during the season, during the off season to try to improve. But two, you never really know what you have until you try it out. And I think there's times where you do experiments and you get lucky and you say, wow, that really worked. And there's other times where you do experiments and say, you know what? Now we know that's not best moving forward. I think it was a little hard on Cooper just because of all the spotlight and all the drama that was going on with Dallas. And there was such pressure for him to kind of be the savior. When Dallas first made the deal, everyone was like, what is going on? Then when they got rewarded with that number one pick, in the lottery, everyone was like, you even saw the comments that they made, like, now you're starting to see our plan come to fruition, and you're going, wait a second, you didn't plan on getting, a 1%, pick, but then they thought, okay, Cooper's going to be the savior. He is going to make that deal not look so bad. And with Luka balling, averaging at the time like 40 points a game to start the season, and then with Kyrie out, with AD in and out of the lineup, and then Cooper not being as dominant as people had hoped early on from the jump, I think that was what combined everything. I think, there might be another time where they move back to trying to give him the ball more or trying to, experiment, but I don't know if it was fair for them to try on opening night when there was so much pressure, so much spotlight, to throw him in that fire. And I think it did. You can kind of see him get his feathers ruffled for the first time ever. I've spent some time with him, not as his trainer, but he's been at like Jayson Tatum's elite camp and other things. And I've been so impressed with how mature he's always been, how he's asked questions, how he's always wanted to learn, how he's always been coachable, how he's approached the game. And I thought that was the first time in his career, and again, I had followed it from afar, that I had seen the dips of confidence almost. So I think that was the only thing that I didn't like about it, was there was just the timing of it. But I think Cooper is going to be a hell of a player, and I think that people forget sometimes that he's 18 years old, one of the youngest players in the NBA.
I totally agree with that, and I think you and me are a lot higher on Cooper than a lot of others. And I think the reason is because his biggest improvement area is the ISO scoring, and which a lot of your guys are great at. But I think that people can't imagine an all-time great without the bag. You know what I mean? I think there's an overemphasis on the bag.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that people don't realize, like, Kevin Durant shot under, I think, 30% from three his rookie season. You know what I mean? Like, Kevin Durant is one of the best shooters of all time and still struggled. I remember days when Steph Curry wasn't an all-star. I remember when he was celebrating a 4-year, I think $44 million deal because they weren't sure if his ankle was going to hold up, and then things changed. So, I mean, while there are some people that come in the league and just dominate right away, I think that there's only one like Wemby every decade almost. It feels like he came out and dominated from the jump, but majority of players, it takes some time to grow and develop and mature and kind of get your foot in the league. And so, like I said, I have no doubt that Cooper is going to be a really good player, and I think that so much of it is just expectations. The expectations were so high, and I think that when he came out and struggled a little bit early on, and now you've seen him get his feet under him, and he's doing good, but he's not doing as dominant as everybody thought he was going to be. But I think it was just unfair expectations from the jump, and I think that over time, I think people will realize that he's a really good player.
You mentioned Wemby, and obviously he got stronger. He changed his shot diet a little bit. But what are you seeing from his skill set that really allowed him to take this leap?
The first thing was what you mentioned already, shot diet. I always thought that him going to a high volume 3-point approach first was not the way to do it. I always thought it was inside then out, because at his height, his size, if he had a hook over both shoulders, a fadeaway over both shoulders, and he could read double teams where he can use his height to pass over people, I was like, how do you guard that? And so, I always looked at like the Jokic shot diet as being like almost like a perfect diet for him, where he's like slowly backing down people, getting deep position. If the Spurs do some cutting and back screening to get him into the post on the move, I mean, how do you really stop that? And then if you do double team him, if he has the patience and poise of Jokic, where he can just find the dunker spot if they're ball side, find a cutter if they're there, or just patient, hold the ball and skip it. So I think the reason that he's had success was early on, people let him play in space. Then I think he went through that little struggle period where people started throwing double teams at him. That's a natural thing that everybody struggles with. I've had to go through it with like Joel Embiid, when teams just started throwing ridiculous coverages at him. Then it no longer became about can you score on your guy. It became like, can you manipulate the defense? Can you get your teammates in the right spot? Which is the next evolution for Wemby, is not only being really good himself, but also telling his teammates where they need to be. And then just having the poise to kind of slow down, not try to beat the doubles right away, just accept the doubles and then put your teammates in the right spot so you can pass out of them. So I've been really impressed with Wemby. I mean, obviously defense, he's just an animal. Like, it's like one of those things where you're like, the worst case scenario is he's like maybe the best defender all time, like the worst case scenario.
Right.
Now it's just about staying healthy, and then offensively just keeping the development process being all about team success, and how does he get, his teammates in the right spot so that he can just pick people apart.
It's interesting you mentioned the defense, because in my world, we're always talking about like top 10, top 5, and then you start putting him in that category, and then you start thinking about his defense on top of the offense, and you're like, man, what's this guy's potential? It's crazy, because even if he stays like he is now, which he won't, he has top 5 impact in the league. It's insane.
Yeah, no, he's just a special talent. I think that ultimately people are going to judge him, especially in the ring culture that we're in, on does he get it done and does he win? And I think the other thing that I've noticed, and especially having a lot of star players that I work with, everybody loves these young stars for the first couple years, regardless if they win or not. A lot of times they get drafted high, so they're usually going to teams that aren't very good. The expectations are very low. But then if they don't win a championship after like 4 or 5 years, that's when you start to see the fans start turning on them, the hate start rolling in. And so, for Wemby's sake, hopefully they have playoff success in the first couple of years. Otherwise, what you'll start seeing is people saying, oh, he's a regular season this, or he's a regular season that, or he can't get it done when it's done. And that just adds more pressure. So I wish fans weren't like that. I wish they could just appreciate the talent that he is and the growth path that he's on. But, for his sake, I hope that he has, the Spurs have some playoff success so that he doesn't have to deal with that unnecessary hate early on in his career, because people go from loving you to hating on you real quick in the NBA, as you've seen. And so that's something that, we'll see if he has to go through, depending on how the Spurs do in the playoffs.
It almost feels in any industry, they love you, then they hate you, then they love you again.
Yep. Yeah. No, and in the NBA, as you know, it's the social media landscape is the most toxic landscape out of all the like professional sports, it seems like. And I feel like it's almost just because the basketball culture is more of a trash talking culture. You know what I mean? It's one of those things that, you see behind me, I got my N1 mixtape tour, VHS tapes back in the day. I used to love watching it. It was just trash talk. It's fun. And it's also like players on the court. It's just, you grow up in a playground, you grow up in recess talking trash. Whereas, there is trash talk in football, but it's, not as prevalent, in other sports. And so in soccer, it's more of a team game. And, hockey, there's only so many goals, so it's not as much trash talk, I would assume. And so I think in basketball, it's just naturally that we all talk trash. And so I think we gravitate towards it as fans as well, where we're comparing and contrasting and, making sure that to elevate one, we got to put down the other. And so it's just one of those things where I think the new broadcast has been a lot better. I think we're seeing
Yeah.
people start highlighting actual basketball and education, but I think what still drives attention is still the I've seen you on some of your, I think it's what, House of Highlights or Hoop of Highlights or something, where you guys just go at each other. So that's just the culture that we're in right now.
I do what I do, Drew, and you do what you do, Drew. That's what makes us great.
I hear you. I hear you. And it's funny because you can honestly argue anything. That's the one thing that I've always appreciated about you from afar, is that you and I are people that if we want to get under somebody's skins, we can take any approach. It's almost like there's two players, and before you say, all right, which one am I arguing? And you don't care. It's just like, I'm
100%.
just going to piss the other person off. So I've always respected that about you, that even if you don't believe in something, if you want to just get under somebody's skin, you can go there with them.
Well, I'm not going to go too far and say as I don't believe it, but you grew up playing basketball, and I grew up playing basketball. And when I was playing against the older kids, I mean, I used to want to get underneath their skin. I used to talk so much trash. So I'm bringing that to what I'm doing today, and I'm sure you do that with your clients.
That's all I do. You know what I mean? And it's a different way. Like I said, like we talked about earlier, there is a way of being just their biggest cheerleader. And at times I am. Like at times, like, especially publicly. Publicly, people think that I'm just like the biggest like yes man ever because they see me like just promoting all the good stuff. Like I'll even have fans, like not just one or two fans, like hundreds of fans will be like, I only see you post when your clients are doing well. I'm like, duh, you think I'm gonna highlight their weak, like their bad things, like socially and publicly? No, I'm trying to help them, like from their public image. I'm trying to like help, whatever. But privately, like when they get a compliment, they're like, what? You actually said something good to me or about me? Like they like don't ever hear that from me. So I think it's a constant game of just pulling and pushing and trying to get the most out of them. But publicly, I usually choose to celebrate my clients, and privately, I choose to bash them and tell them that there's always another level.
Well, you're really in the trenches with your clients. I think what some people get upset is what we talked about before. Somebody rebounded for somebody maybe one day out of a 365-day year, and then they play really well, and then they post that time that they were
Agree with
rebounding for
that.
them.
Agree
Like
with
that.
that.
That's how it goes. So I don't know if they're grouping you into that, but you're really in the trenches, so it's a little bit different. I think that's what they're feeling, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's just what the era we live in. You know what I mean? And there's really no way to know if how much you're in. You know what I mean? Like they don't see the FaceTimes, they don't see the late night film sessions, they don't see the off the court stuff that I'm helping them with. They don't see the film studies, they don't see the talks with the coaches, the meetings, they don't see the late nights in the gym. So, and you know what? I went away from posting. I used to post a ton. Like I was one of the OG like social media kind of trainers. I remember when I started doing like pre-draft videos with like Brad Beal back in like 2012, and people were like, "Why would you post so that now scouts can overanalyze and critique them?" And agents were really mad that I was posting pre-draft videos. And then I remember when I had Andrew Wiggins and Zach LaVine and that class, and I started posting videos of that, and they went viral and they started helping out. Zach LaVine was projected 29th in the NBA draft coming out. People were criticizing why he was leaving UCLA. We got bulletin board material, people saying like, Zach LaVine's not even going to be good on the main red clause. Why would he enter the NBA draft? We started posting videos. People saw him. Then they came to his pro day, and I remember him just skyrocketing up into like the kind of late lottery kind of feel, and then him being a lottery pick. And we thought a lot of it had to do with people just seeing how good he was. Like, wait a second, what are we missing? Like, he's such a great athlete, and he's a great shooter, and he's a great talent, and he's skilled. Like, maybe we're just overthinking this. Maybe he just didn't have the opportunity at UCLA. So I do understand. I went away from posting it because most of my clients were like, early on, were like, we want to make sure people know we're working hard. And now that they're really good and they're all stars and all NBA talents and stuff, they're like, yo, let's keep this between us. And so I've respected that and went a different path.
Zach still gets a lot of hate, and it's interesting because they say like good stats, bad team guy, but there was a point with the Bulls where they were really good. If you look at Aaron Gordon, like they called him that with the Orlando Magic, and now look at what a winning player he is. It comes down so much to situation when you're such a skillful and athletic player.
Yeah, I actually talk about that with different guys and stuff like that. Here's something, it's funny. We were just looking at this, but here's like the efficiency thing. volume efficiency scores in the NBA, Zach is averaging 1.19 points per possession, which is fourth in the NBA. So it's like Jokic, then Shea, then Norm Powell, then Zach. I mean, that like fourth in the NBA. Since he's entered the NBA, he's been the second best 3-point shooter behind Steph if you look at percentage and you look at, volume of makes. It's just he's never played with another star. And, stars drive winning. So if you think about it, if you said like, hey, who are the best players that Zach LaVine's ever played with? You would probably start with who? DeMar DeRozan?
Really liked him and Lonzo like together.
But you're saying the best player he's ever played with is Lonzo. You know what I mean? And again, I think Lonzo, when he was healthy, he really was the engine behind that. Kind of making.
He was kind of like their Haliburton for them.
But you really look at it and you go, man, like he's never played with a star, and stars drive winning. There was I don't remember the exact stat, but if you go back, the last like 40 years, I think like 37 of the teams have had somebody that's been in the top 7 of MVP voting that have won the championship. And then like 85% of the champions have had somebody that's won an MVP at some point in their NBA career. So it's like if you don't have an MVP caliber player, you just can't. You don't win when it matters. And so Zach just hasn't played there. And again, there's things that he can do better. Trust me. Like I know people are going to jump on and say, well, he's a great scorer, but he doesn't make others better. He could get more assists. And you're like, yeah, he could be a better playmaker. Or you could say, defensively, he's not there every single night. Of course, yes, you could. You could say that. But I would go back and be like, man, how nice would it be if Zach played with a rim protector? And then also, how nice would it be if Zach was a number 2 scorer behind a top, if he was on a team with Jokic or a Giannis or one of those guys, and you're going, man, it'd be a different look. But I do think it's interesting in the era that we're in, how much situation and opportunity impacts how we talk about players. If Zach did play on a winning team, let's say he was on Denver instead of Michael Porter Jr. these last couple of years. I mean, he's now, a 7-time All-Star probably, and a guy that, is being talked about as a Hall of Famer and all of these things just because he's on a different team, and there's also situations where you look at like LeBron and you go, one way you can look at LeBron and say, man, he led the finals, both teams in like points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals one year, and he didn't win. And people use that negatively against him, even though he was by far the best player in that series. But then you also look at it and go, man, if Ray Allen and Kyrie didn't hit big shots, maybe he's 2-8 in the finals. Those are things that he had no control over. He had no control over how his teammates played when he lost, even though he was dominant. And he also had no control over his teammates making big shots when he could have lost. So, but yet we look at, those things in reverse ways. So I think that's the one thing that I don't like is when people argue basketball, a lot of times they don't look at basketball. They look at overall numbers, or they look at points per game or averages. They look at numbers and accolades versus how good is he as a basketball player. Like, did you consider watching film? Did you consider how he plays and how he would translate in all the eras and all that kind of stuff, which I think should play a part in everything.
Who's the most skillful basketball player ever?
That's hard. That's really hard because if you talk about both ways, if you talk about, offense, defense, stuff like that, I would always lean towards Michael Jordan because I think he was so ahead of his time too. You think Michael Jordan was doing things that we study and train players now to do, and he was doing it off of reaction. You know what I mean? Like nowadays we might be like, oh, look how he decelerates into his 1-2 jumper. Or look at how he dream shakes and throws his shoulder. And look how he was doing all that naturally, just feel. Defensively, I put a whole video on YouTube of just Michael Jordan defensively. He was picking people's pockets off the dribble. He was turning guys in the backcourt. He was, able to wall up in the post. Now, if you talk about just offensively, I go with Steph. And the reason I go with Steph is because I think I don't even think you can argue that he's the greatest shooter of all time. I think everyone knows he is the greatest shooter of all time. But he's also an amazing ball handler. He's a great passer, amazing elite finisher. His footwork is unparalleled. I mean, he's got everything offensively that you can have. But I think you can make arguments also. You got KD, who's a 6'10", 6'11" version of him. You got Kyrie, who's, as skilled
Kyrie has more options as an offensive player than almost anyone ever. Like, just the options he has is crazy.
Agree. And the reason I put Steph above those guys is because I think Steph has a different level of gravity that just, I mean, I think that if Steph is the number one option and stuff like that, like you look at like Draymond Green, for instance, and you're going, man, look at how he is when Steph's on the court with him, and look when Steph's not in the games. You know what I mean? Like, and
Right.
it's just that's not a knock on Draymond because he brings his value to winning is playing defense and then being that facilitator that when Steph does get doubled, he throws it, and he's so good at making that 3-on-2 backside read, but it's because Steph. And so. When we talk about gravity, like who do you fear as soon as they cross half court? I think people fear Kyrie when they're on an island. I think people fear KD when they have to square up and guard him. But I think like as soon as Steph crosses half court, he's nonstop moving, he's nonstop cutting. When he has the ball, he's a threat. When he doesn't have the ball, he's a threat. I just think that makes him as skilled as possible.
Watching this NBA season unfold really early, it's a small sample size, but I feel like the game has been faster and maybe even a little bit more physical. You are watching a lot of film. What have you been seeing that could help us kind of figure out where the game is heading?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The thing that I think first stands out is it is at the fastest pace that it's ever been. That's not just watching the game. That's actually analytically, it's at the fastest it's ever been. I also think that it's interesting. Like the NBA defines a star as somebody that's been an all-star in the last 3 seasons. And we're down to, I think it's like 52% of stars that are active right now. Like there's almost half of the stars are hurt right now, which I think contributes to the new era of pace and space. And you have to guard everybody outside the 3-point line. There's also more skill, which means there's more decelerations, there's more accelerations, there's, whatever. People are stronger, better athletes, which means, players are playing higher, they're jumping. There's also more, physicality at pace. I think people always confuse are like, no, the NBA was tougher back in the 80s and 90s. It's like, it might have been more like forearm tough, but it wasn't more like going full speed and then collisions, which I think makes a difference. But I think it'll be interesting to see how the NBA adapts, whether they adjust the scheduling, whether they eliminate back-to-backs, whether they shorten the season, because NBA teams aren't going to adapt the way they play because that's the best way to win. The numbers say, like, let's get up and down. We're going to score at a higher rate in transition than we are in a half court. We're going to try to, get multiple closeouts. We're going to try to get driving kicks. The defense breaks down over time. But it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But I think that the new modern era is just everybody has to be able to make shots at the highest level. I think that you see more big guys being more skillful, as impactors. You're seeing the re-evolution of the double coming back and paying dividends so far. OKC won with it last year. You see the Rockets going big this year. You see a lot of teams that are trying to kind of duplicate that. But I think it always changes. I think that's the big thing about the NBA is, 2 years ago, people were complaining that the Celtics shot too many three-pointers. And it was like, this era of basketball sucks. The Celtics are going to dominate. Then the Celtics obviously went through some injuries and didn't win. And then it was like, wait, double big is the new thing. Pacers had so much success, and so did OKC, of pressing full court. And now everybody was like, we're just going to be the hardest playing team and pick up full court. And picking up full court is actually at an all-time high as well right now. So what I would tell you is, when you asked the question, I gave you a long-winded answer to say that trends are going to constantly change. I think the one thing that the trend that is going to have to be adjusted is how do we keep the stars and players healthy? If the ultimate goal is to win, and the best way to win is a thing that gets players hurt. And I don't think there's a solution. You see some load management experts that say we need to train them harder so that they're more prepared for their bodies or used to this. And other people say, no, it's the wear and tear is just going to break them down. And so I think that that's the thing that scientists and people that are a lot smarter than you and I are going to have to figure out, just so that we can keep everybody healthy and so that ultimately fans get the best product on the court every single night.
Nobody's smarter than you and I, Drew. Nobody. No, you did mention the injuries, and a lot of your top guys are injured right now. Growing up, when I went through injuries, I looked at it as an opportunity. If I hurt my left hand, I would work on my right hand. If I hurt my legs, I'll work on my upper body. Do you bring that approach as well, or do you believe that they should just chill at that point?
No, there's no such thing as chilling. I think there's always ways to get better, whether it's film, whether it's form shooting, whether it's working on a weakness, whether
Right.
it's seeing the game differently. I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize is like when you do get injured, it gives you a chance to finally step back and kind of
Yeah.
reevaluate everything. Because most of the time, what happens is like these guys, especially the guys that are really successful in the playoffs, after the playoffs end, let's say that's late June, then you're talking about they don't do anything in July, letting their body recover from a long season. Then you get August and early September, those 6 weeks to really train, but 6 weeks, and then after that, they're right back into their season. In a season, you might make little adjustments based on film and little, kind of strategic adjustments, but you can't really like evolve. And so when you do get hurt for a period of time, a lot of times it gives you a chance to actually evolve and change things and grow. So, both Haliburton and Tatum have both been like, man, we're stronger physically than we've ever been before because we've never had this block of time to gain strength.
Yeah.
Now, while it sucks, they've never had to sit out this many basketball games, and it's painful to watch their teams not be as successful as they would be when they're out there. But there are some advantages as well, and there's sometimes that you can see the good, like you mentioned. If you break your right hand, now you work on your left, and now when you come back, you got something that you didn't have. So, our hope for both of those guys is just that they don't come back the exact same; they come back better, which is something that is obviously always the goal.
All right, we're going to start winding down. I did want to ask you, it does feel like there's more injuries today, but players are obviously playing longer as well. We see KD, LeBron, Steph, even Westbrook playing at a high level. Everybody just points, it's the science, it's this, it's that. But what specifically are players doing today to allow them to play longer?
I don't know. I mean, I think that obviously it is how they take care of their bodies. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, I wasn't around to watch everybody what they were doing in the 70s and 80s and 90s.
I think the 70s was super crazy, bro. I don't know.
You hear stories. So I think that
right.
I think that like nowadays you got guys that are full-time PTs that are like after games they're going through and doing tissue work. And then you're also getting your ice baths and you're also getting stretched out a certain ways. You're also doing prehab. You're also lifting weights, which was not as common earlier on. So I think there's just so much that they're doing. Treatments have also evolved. You think back in the day, like, I remember I had a meniscus scope when I was in high school, 2008. That was like you walked out, you had crutches when you left, and then you had like a 6-week to 8-week recovery process. Now you get cleaned up and you walk out of surgery and like 3 weeks later, you're good to go. So I think that medical procedures have obviously also improved. And then I also think that the players are more skilled so they can adapt and grow and change their games. I think that that's something that I look at, like even like a Jayson Kidd who came in the NBA and couldn't shoot and then learned how to shoot and it evolved his career. Think about young Ray Allen going down the lane in a Bucks uniform, dunking on cats. And then later on, he was a spot-up shooter that could move without the ball and he evolved his game. I think that's another evolution too, is like players now are adapting and growing. So instead of like when they lose their athleticism, they're out. Now they can continue to evolve and play a role that's beyond what their original initial role was.
From a straight skill perspective, you could really get better forever, honestly. Like, your athleticism will decline, so the skills won't show at the highest of levels anymore. But just from like straight skill, you could always learn new things in basketball.
100%. And shooting's the first one that allows you, like, you look at a lot of these big guys and stuff like that. Brook Lopez is a great example. Somebody that came in the league, couldn't shoot. Blake Griffin, another example, came in the league, couldn't shoot. And these guys, they evolved and grew their game. Whereas when you look back at even the early 2000s, you had a lot of these bruiser power forwards that were mid-range assassins and bully ball down low. But then when the NBA, grew to, became a pace and space league, they all kind of got extinct because that power ball, bruiser, power forward that couldn't shoot was no longer valuable. And so I think that's the biggest thing is nowadays people look at longevity from a skill aspect too, of how do I change your game and improve your game so that you can last, a lot longer and sneak a few more contracts out. You know what I mean?
Drew, thanks for taking the time. It's always great talking basketball with you. I know the book, it came out a year ago now, right? About a year maybe? How's that going? Tell us about the book and tell us where we can find you.
Yeah, no, it's going well. I mean, I think the big thing for me is always just, connecting with people and coaches. I went away from it for a while, like from social media. I just went completely away, but now I've been back on social media trying to like.
How was that journey for you? I'm curious because I'm on social media so much, not in terms of scrolling or anything, just putting out content. Like, how was that for you?
Yeah, I'm not a big consumer of content. I'm more of a I'm more. But I did used to post a ton, and now, like, I mean, if you look on Instagram, I don't think I posted in the last month. You know what I mean? And so, to me, my journey was just I went away from it because I was like, I don't need it. That's not how that's not what I want to do. But now I went back to it just because I realized how much value you can provide to coaches, players, and trainers. And so
Yeah.
now I've tried to, get back to it. But I think it's just a healthy balance. I think it's what allows you to help as many people and what's your overall mission with it. And I think as long as you keep that in mind, I think some people need to post. That's their job. I think some people want to post because that ultimately is going to drive in more opportunities. And I think that there's other people that just say, you know what? I don't want to chase that. I'm doing fine in other areas. And so I think it
Yeah.
is good to have a social footprint just because it does allow you to share with the world, whether that's opinions or stances that you want to take or, whatever. But, it's one of those journeys that I've gone up and back, and never decided what's the perfect route for me. But, it is fun. So yeah, Drew Hanlen on all socials and stuff like that. But you won't see me in an argument lab like you are. You know what I mean? You'll see me just throwing hot takes here and there.
Wait. Next time you are in New York, you don't want to just debate me for an hour in studio? Let's
Yeah,
just
I don't
debate.
know how y'all do that. I don't know how people watch that stuff either. But I applaud you for I applaud you for
I'm a
getting the
competitor, Drew. So I used to play basketball for many years. Now I got to funnel that somewhere, Drew. Got to
Yeah, no,
funnel
I
it.
hear you. I hear you. That is the one thing that I've never understood is how people consume so much opinionated content, like even with the talk shows and stuff. But I mean, obviously, Stephen A. getting 20 million. I mean, it does, it sells. But I'm glad that from a basketball standpoint, we're getting back to teaching the game, and I'm seeing more like on court sessions and film breakdown sessions. And I think the more educated that the average fan is, I think the better it's going to be for basketball. Because the one fear that I have that I share with so many people is that I don't think many people watch full NBA games anymore. I
Right.
think it's almost like NFL Red Zone, where people, even if they have League Pass, they're going back and forth and just spotlighting games, and people are watching for fantasy, or people are watching for their sports bets, or people are watching highlights just to argue online and stuff like that. And so I really do love when fans actually watch the game and understand the game. And I think that if